This story is titled Dad Gifts My Late MOMS House to His New Wife because he wants to protect her and leaves me homeless, but karma hits them hard after he dies, and I am done. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. This story is titled Dad Gifts My Late Mom's House to His New Wife because he wants to protect her and leaves me homeless, but karma hits them hard after he dies. Alright, so a 21-year-old male, figured I'd share this messed up situation I'm dealing with. It's going to be pretty long, so bear with me. When Mom was alive, things were great. We lived in a cozy house my grandparents gave her when she was pregnant with me. She was a nurse, always juggling work and family, while Dad worked construction. Sundays were our thing, pancakes, cartoons, and pretending not to hear Mom sighing at our dumb jokes. Every Sunday, we'd make these massive stacks of pancakes together. Mom always let me add way too many chocolate chips. Then we'd watch whatever stupid cartoons were on, while Dad pretended to read the newspaper but would actually laugh louder than me at all the dumb jokes. We had this normal, happy life. Mom kept our family calendar on the fridge and remembered everyone's birthdays and appointments. She planned the holidays and made sure we had traditions, like how we'd always drive around looking at Christmas lights the weekend before Christmas with hot chocolate in the car. Little stuff that didn't seem important then but means everything now. When I was 13, Mom started getting these headaches. At first, everyone thought it was just stress or maybe she needed new glasses, but then she started forgetting stuff, which was super weird for her. Dad took her to the doctor, and 2 weeks later, we found out it was brain cancer, not the we caught it early kind either, but the aggressive, it's already spread kind. Everything happened so fast after that. Mom tried treatment but got really sick from it. I remember visiting her in the hospital and barely recognizing her. She lost all her hair and so much weight. 8 months after diagnosis, she was gone. I was still 13, like a month away from turning 14. I didn't even really understand what was happening. One day I had a mom, and then I just didn't. Dad completely fell apart. He'd try to keep it together when I was around, but I'd hear him crying in their bedroom at night. He started drinking a lot. He's better now, forgot to pay bills, and basically survived on autopilot. I was pretty much raising myself for a while there. The house that used to be so full of life became this silent, depressing place where we both just existed without really living. I learned to do laundry from YouTube and survived on takeout. The house got messy, quiet. Sometimes we'd just sit in silence, staring at Mom's empty chair. The house wasn't a home anymore, just a museum of Mom. I started spending more time at friends' houses, just to get away from the sadness. Dad threw himself into work and picked up extra shifts. Neither of us really knew how to talk about what happened, so mostly we just didn't. When relatives would visit, they'd clean up the place and stock the fridge. But as soon as they left, we'd slide back into our depressing routine. About a year after Mom died, I came home to find Dad actually cleaning the house, like really cleaning. He'd gotten a haircut too. That's when he told me he'd met someone at work, a woman whose husband had left her a few years back. They'd gone for coffee a couple of times. I remember feeling weirdly relieved that he seemed more like himself, but also kind of betrayed on Mom's behalf, which is stupid, I know. What was he supposed to do? Be alone forever? But I was 14, so everything felt like the end of the world. Dad started dating this woman, let's call her Lisa. At first, he'd only see her when I was at a friend's house or had after-school stuff. Then, eventually, he asked if it would be okay if she came over for dinner. I said, sure, because what else was I going to say? The first time I met Lisa, she brought me a video game I'd mentioned, wanting Dad must have told her. She seemed nice enough, laughed at Dad's dumb jokes, asked me about school without being too pushy. She had 2 kids of her own, both older than me, a son who was 17 and in college, and a daughter who was like 18 and working some retail job. I didn't meet them right away. That first dinner was awkward as hell, but not terrible. Lisa kept trying too hard, and I could tell she was nervous. Dad seemed happier than he'd been in a long time, though. Then Lisa started coming around more and more after that first dinner. At first, it was just a couple of times a week. Then suddenly, she was there every night, cooking dinner and acting like she owned the place. I tried to be cool about it because Dad seemed happier, and honestly, it was nice having actual meals again instead of microwaved crap. About 3 weeks after I met her, Lisa dropped the first bomb. We were eating dinner, she'd made lasagna that was nowhere near as good as Mom's, but I didn't say anything when she looked at me all serious and said, "You know, if you ever wanted to call me Mom, that would be okay with me." I nearly choked on my food. Dad just sat there with this dumb smile, like she'd said the most wonderful thing ever. I mumbled something about, "Thanks, but I'm good," and excused myself to go do homework. That night, I pulled out old photo albums and just stared at pictures of my actual mom until I fell asleep. Things moved way too fast after that. Within 6 months of dating, Lisa was practically living at our house. Her kids would come over sometimes on weekends, which was weird as hell. They were both in their 20s, but acted like they were still high schoolers, leaving their stuff everywhere and expecting their mom to clean up after them. They never really talked to me except to ask if I was done with the TV or whatever. Dad and Lisa got engaged about a year after they started dating. He took me out for burgers one night and told me before he actually proposed. I wanted to be happy for him, I really did, but all I could think was that it hadn't even been 2 years since Mom died. When I didn't immediately jump for joy, Dad got that worried look and started with the whole, "Your mom would want us to be happy" speech. What was I going to do? Tell him no? So I faked a smile and said I was happy for him. The wedding was small, at least just close family and a few friends at our backyard. Lisa wanted to have it at our house because it was becoming her home too. I saw my mom's parents, my grandparents, trying to keep it together during the ceremony. They were always nice to Lisa's face, but my grandma pulled me aside at one point and whispered, "This house is your mother's legacy, don't forget that." I didn't understand what she meant at the time. After the wedding, it started slow. A new couch, different curtains, little changes here and there. Then one day, I walked in, and it hit me like a punch to the gut. Mom's reading chair gone, donated. The family photos rearranged with Dad and Lisa's wedding photos front and center, while the ones with Mom got shoved into the hallway. Even my growth chart, the one Mom had carefully marked every year, painted over like it never existed. Lisa wasn't just redecorating. She was erasing Mom, and Dad let it happen. I finally said something when I saw Mom's gardening stuff in a box, headed for Goodwill. "Why are you getting rid of her things?" I asked Lisa. She gave me this fake sympathetic look and said, "Sweetie, it's been almost 2 years. We need to move forward as a family." Dad backed her up, saying it was time to heal. I wanted to scream that getting rid of Mom's stuff wasn't healing, it was erasing her, but I just grabbed the box and took it to my room. Lisa's kids treated our house like a free hotel. Tom crashed on the couch after partying. Emma used our laundry like a laundromat. They left messes, I got lectures. When I was 16, Lisa's son broke up with his girlfriend and suddenly needed a place to stay. Guess whose room he got? Yep, mine. I got moved to the smaller guest room while he took over my childhood bedroom. Lisa painted over it without even asking me, covered up the wall where Mom had measured my height every year with this ugly gray color. When I got upset, Dad told me I was being selfish and needed to be more welcoming to my new brother. Brother? This dude was 22, had never said more than 10 words to me, and suddenly, he's my brother? Lisa was always sweet as pie when Dad was around, bringing me snacks while I studied, asking about my day, all that stepmom TV movie crap. But when Dad wasn't there, total different person. She'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how messy I was compared to her perfect kids, or how I didn't appreciate all she did for this family. She'd go through my stuff without asking and move things around in my room because she was just cleaning. Dad either didn't notice or didn't care. He was so wrapped up in his new, perfect family that he couldn't see what was happening. Anytime I tried to bring it up, he'd get this disappointed look and say I wasn't giving Lisa a chance. So eventually, I just stopped trying. I focused on school, got a part-time job, and counted down the days until I could move out. When I was 17, I overheard Lisa and Dad talking about making it official. At first, I thought they were talking about adopting her kids or something equally stupid, but then I heard Lisa say, "I just don't feel like this is really our house," when it still has her name on the deed. That's when I realized she wanted Dad to put her name on my mom's house, the house my grandparents had given to my mom, not to Dad. I didn't say anything, though. I was so close to graduating and getting the hell out that I didn't want to rock the boat. Plus, what did I know about house deeds and ownership? I was just a kid. By the time I graduated high school, the house barely resembled the home I grew up in. I moved out the second I could. Found a cheap apartment with a roommate about 30 minutes away, close enough to visit Dad regularly, but far enough that I didn't have to deal with Lisa and her kids on a daily basis. Dad seemed sad I was moving out so young, but honestly, it wasn't home anymore. It was just a house where some strangers lived, one of whom happened to be my dad. For about 2 years after moving out, I kept my head down and focused on my own life, taking classes at community college while working at this warehouse job that paid decent. I'd visit Dad every couple of weeks, usually timing it for when I knew Lisa would be at her yoga class or whatever. Dad and I would watch sports, grab a burger, normal father-son stuff. We had this unspoken agreement not to talk about the tension with Lisa or how the house had changed. Looking back, that was a massive mistake. But hey, hindsight's 20/20, right? Whenever I did see Lisa during these visits, she'd put on her perfect stepmom act, all hugs, and "we miss you around here," and asking about my classes. It was such bull. One time, she even baked cookies for my visit. She had never baked a single damn cookie when I lived there. Dad ate it up, though, always looking at me hopefully like, "See, she's trying." I'd just smile and nod and count the minutes until I could leave without seeming rude. Her kids were still around constantly, despite being well into their 20s. The son, let's call him Tom, had started a business, which, as far as I could tell, meant selling weed and living in my old bedroom rent-free. The daughter, we'll call her Emma, had cycled through 3 different jobs in 2 years, but somehow always had money for new clothes and going out. Neither of them had their act together, but Lisa acted like they were these amazing, successful adults while I was still figuring things out. One really messed up thing was when my grandparents, Mom's parents, stopped coming over. They used to visit at least once a month when Mom was alive, and even after she died, they'd still come check on me and Dad. But after Lisa moved in, those visits got more and more awkward until they just stopped altogether. When I asked Grandma about it, she just said, "It's too hard to see everything changed." I started meeting them for lunch instead, away from the house. What really pissed me off was how Lisa started trying to take over family holidays. Mom had always gone all out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. She had special decorations, traditional recipes, the whole 9 yards. Lisa threw all that out and started doing holidays her way, different food, different traditions, even moved celebrations to different days, sometimes to accommodate her kids' schedules. I started visiting less and less. It was too painful seeing Mom's house transformed into this space I didn't recognize. Dad noticed and started making more effort to meet me for lunch or come by my apartment, which was cool, I guess, but every conversation somehow circled back to how great Lisa was, or some accomplishment of her kids. Tom is thinking about real estate, aka still selling weed from his bedroom, or Emma might go back to school, she didn't. Meanwhile, I was actually in school, working my ass off at a real job, and living independently, but that was never as impressive somehow. About a year ago, my grandma got sick, nothing terminal. Just bad pneumonia, but she was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. I went to visit her, and she got really serious all of a sudden. She took my hand and said, "Your mother wanted you to have that house someday. It was her home, and she wanted it to be your home too." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever talked to me about what would happen to the house in the future. I guess I always assumed it would go to Dad, and then, well, I hadn't thought beyond that. After Grandma got better, I tried to casually bring this up with Dad. We were grabbing lunch, just the two of us, and I mentioned that Grandma had been talking about Mom's wishes for the house. Dad got this weird look on his face and changed the subject real quick. That's when I knew something was up. Dad's a terrible liar, his ears get red, and he starts talking too fast. All the signs were there. I let it drop for the moment, but I started paying more attention when I visited. That's when I noticed the mail, specifically some papers from a lawyer's office that Dad tried to hide when I walked in. I also overheard Lisa on the phone talking about making sure everything's in order and protecting our assets. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my gut was telling me something shady was happening. Then, last month, my cousin let something slip at a family thing. She mentioned that Lisa had been asking her mom, my aunt, about how inheritance works and whether my mom had left a will. That set off all kinds of alarm bells. Why would Lisa be asking about Mom's will, unless she was worried about her claim to the house? I did some digging and found out Mom probably didn't have a will when she died. She was only 39, and it's not like we had tons of money or property besides the house. From what I could piece together from conversations with relatives, everything just automatically went to Dad when she died, which I guess makes sense legally, but it didn't feel right. The house came from Mom's family. It was her house that her parents gave to her. I tried talking to my other relatives about it, and that's when I found out I wasn't the only one concerned. Mom's whole side of the family had been watching Lisa take over the house and erase Mom's presence, and they were all upset about it but didn't feel like they could say anything. My aunt finally told me, "We've been waiting for you to stand up about this, but we didn't want to create problems between you and your dad." So that's where things stood until the big blow-up happened last month. I was stewing on all this, trying to figure out how to approach Dad about it without seeming like I was just being greedy or whatever. I wanted him to understand that this wasn't about money or property. It was about preserving Mom's legacy and respecting where the house came from. But before I could figure out the right words, Dad decided to drop a bomb on me that blew everything up. About a month ago, he calls me up asking if I could come over for dinner. Said he wanted to talk about some future planning stuff, which I figured was going to be boring financial crap, or maybe him asking for help setting up a retirement account or whatever. I almost said no because I had plans with my roommate, but he seemed kind of serious about it, so I agreed. When I got to the house, Lisa was there, of course, along with both her kids, red flag number 1. This wasn't just some casual dinner. They'd set the table with the good dishes that only come out for special occasions. Lisa had made this elaborate meal with multiple courses. Everyone was being weirdly nice to me, even Tom, who normally barely grunts in my direction. The whole vibe was off, and my stomach was in knots before we even sat down. Dinner conversation was super awkward, lots of small talk about work and weather and other stuff nobody cares about. I kept waiting for Dad to bring up whatever this future planning was, but he avoided the topic until dessert. Classic Dad move. Wait until everyone's full and relaxed before dropping bad news. Finally, after Lisa served some fancy-ass cheesecake that definitely came from a bakery she can't bake for shit, Dad cleared his throat and got that serious look on his face. "Son, I've been thinking a lot about the future lately, about what happens to everything when I'm gone." Great start to a fun conversation, right? Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand, all supportive like, while her kids suddenly got super interested in their phones. I just nodded and waited for the bomb to drop. Dad continued, "I've been meeting with a financial advisor and a lawyer to get everything in order, making sure everyone's taken care of." He paused, like he was waiting for me to praise him for being so responsible or whatever. "That's good," I said, "because what else do you say to that?" Then he dropped it. "We've decided that when I pass, The house will go to Lisa. The rest of my assets, my retirement accounts, investments, insurance payout will be split equally between you and Tom and Emma. I must have looked like he'd slapped me, because he quickly added, "It's the fairest way to handle things. Lisa needs somewhere to live, and this way everyone gets an equal share." I sat there trying to process what I just heard. My mom's house, the one she loved, that I grew up in, was going to Lisa, and I was getting an equal share with her kids, who had no connection to my dad except that he married their mom. "This was my mom's house," I said, my voice sharp now. "Her parents gave it to her, not to you." Lisa put on her fake sympathy. "Sweetie, I know this is emotional for you, but legally, don't call me sweetie," I snapped. "And don't pretend this is about fairness. Your kids have their own family, their own father. This house has nothing to do with you." Dad got that disappointed look. "Son, I understand you're upset, but Lisa is my wife now. I need to make sure she's taken care of. If something happens to me, she could be taken care of without getting Mom's house," I argued. "You have life insurance, retirement accounts. Why does she need this specific house, the house that came from my mom's family?" Emma spoke up. "It's about fairness. We're a family." I laughed bitterly. "No, we're not. You already have 2 parents, 2 inheritances. You never lived here. You have no claim to this house," Tom muttered, selfish prick, under his breath. I ignored him, not worth it. Dad tried to calm things down, talking about how he'd provide for me in other ways, saying maybe I could get his car, a 2010 Honda that's falling apart, and some cash. "I don't want your car," I said. "I don't want your money. I want my mom's house to stay in her family, like she would have wanted, like her parents wanted when they gave it to her." Lisa got all teary-eyed then, doing her best victim impression. "I've tried so hard to make this a home for all of us. I've tried to be a mother to you. You're not my mother," I snapped, "and this isn't your home. You've spent years erasing every trace of my mom from this house. You've thrown away her things, changed everything she loved, cut down her garden, even painted over my growth chart. And now you want to take her house too?" Dad was getting angry now. "That's enough. Lisa has been nothing but good to you. She's my wife, and this is our home now. I've made my decision, and that's final." Something broke inside me then. I stood up, hands shaking. "If you're giving Mom's house to them, then I don't want anything from you, not a penny. You can leave everything to your new family." Dad looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I wasn't just rolling over and accepting this. "You don't mean that. You're just upset." "I do mean it," I said. "Mom would be heartbroken to see her house go to people who never knew her, who've erased every trace of her. Her parents would be devastated." Lisa tried to do her peacemaker routine. "No one's trying to erase your mother, sweetie. We're just moving forward as a family. Stop calling me sweetie," I nearly shouted, "and stop pretending you care about my mom's memory. If you did, you wouldn't be so eager to take her house away from her only child." Tom stood up then, all big man energy. "Don't talk to my mom like that in her own house." "It's not her house," I yelled back. "That's the whole point." Dad slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough. This is still my house, and I won't have shouting at the dinner table." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Dad followed me, asking where I was going. "Home," I said. "My actual home, not this place that used to be home but isn't anymore." "You're being childish," he said. "We need to discuss this like adults." "There's nothing to discuss. You've made your decision. You've chosen them over Mom's memory, over me, over what's right. I can't stop you, but I don't have to pretend I'm okay with it." As I was getting in my car, Lisa came out too, calling after me. "Think about what you're doing. Your father loves you. Don't throw away your relationship over property." I almost laughed at the irony she was telling me not to throw away relationships over property, when that's exactly what my dad was doing. I drove off, feeling like I was going to either puke or cry or both. My phone started blowing up, immediately texts from Dad saying I'd hurt him, from Lisa saying I needed to apologize, even from her kids saying I was being selfish. I turned my phone off and just drove around for a while, trying to process everything. When I finally got back to my apartment, my roommate took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I ended up telling him everything, and he was like, "Dude, that's so messed up. The house should definitely go to you." I stayed up all night thinking about what to do. Part of me felt guilty for walking out on Dad. Another part was so angry I could barely see straight. But the biggest part just felt sad that my mom's house, the last real connection to her, was going to be taken over by people who'd spent years erasing every trace of her. The next morning, Dad called again. "I think you owe Lisa an apology," were his first words, not, "I'm sorry," or "let's figure this out." Just straight to me needing to apologize to her. "Are you serious right now?" I asked. "After what you told me yesterday, you think I'm the one who needs to apologize?" "You are disrespectful to my wife in our home," he said. "It's not her home," I yelled. "That's the whole problem here." We went back and forth for a while, talking in circles. He kept insisting he needed to protect Lisa's future, and that I was being selfish and immature. I kept trying to explain that there were other ways to provide for her without giving her my mom's house, like, she can still live there. It's not like I'm going to throw her in the street, but it shouldn't be in her name. I looked him dead in the eye. "If Mom were here, would she want this?" He hesitated. Just for a second, then, "She'd want me taken care of." I exhaled. That was it. He wasn't protecting himself. He was just giving Lisa what she wanted, and using Mom as an excuse. "We both know that's not true," I said quietly. "Mom would want her house to stay in her family. She'd want it to go to me eventually." "I'm trying to be fair to everyone," he insisted. "No," I said, "you're trying to make Lisa happy at my expense. And you know what? If that's your choice, fine, but don't expect me to pretend I'm okay with it." I hung up after that. A few minutes later, Lisa texted me some long paragraph about how she just wants us all to be a family and how she's always tried to be there for me and blah, blah, blah. I didn't even bother responding. That was a month ago. Since then, Dad's called a few times, trying to get me to come over for dinner, saying we need to clear the air. Lisa keeps sending these guilt-trippy texts about how sad Dad is and how life is too short for family conflicts. I haven't gone over there. I can't bring myself to sit across from them knowing they're planning to take my mom's house. I've talked to Mom's parents and her sister, and they're all furious about the situation. They've offered to help me fight it legally if it comes to that, though nobody's sure if we'd have a case since the house went to Dad when Mom died. The whole thing just makes me sick to my stomach. I keep asking myself what Mom would do in this situation. She was always the stronger one, the one who stood up for what was right. I think she'd fight for that house not because of what it's worth, but because of what it represents. And that's exactly what I'm planning to do. After a week of ignored calls and dodged texts, I finally agreed to meet with my dad. I needed to lay everything out clearly without Lisa or her kids around to gang up on me. I suggested meeting at this diner halfway between our places, neutral territory. Plus, I figured he wouldn't make a scene in public. Dad showed up looking tired, with these dark circles under his eyes. For a second, I felt bad, thinking maybe all this drama was really affecting him. But then I remembered how casually he'd decided to give away Mom's house, like it meant nothing, and my sympathy kind of evaporated. We ordered coffee and sat there in awkward silence for a minute. I could tell he expected me to apologize for standard dad power move, but I wasn't backing down this time. This was too important. I started by telling him straight up that this wasn't about inheritance or money. It was about Mom's memory being systematically erased from the house she loved, and now the final nail in the coffin would be giving that house to someone who never knew her. I reminded him how the house came from Mom's family. I pointed out all the ways Lisa had changed the house over the years. With each example, I could see Dad getting more uncomfortable, shifting in his seat, not meeting my eyes. Deep down, he knew it was true. Then I laid out what felt like a reasonable compromise. Lisa could live in the house as long as she wanted after Dad passed. I wouldn't kick her out or force her to move. I'm not a monster, but legally, the house should be in my name. It should stay in Mom's family. Dad just sat there, stirring his coffee for what felt like forever. When he finally looked up, I could tell from his expression that nothing I said had made a difference. He gave me some BS about how Lisa was his wife now, and he needed to protect her future. He tried to guilt me by saying Mom would understand. Mom would want him to be happy. Mom would approve of his decision. That's when I really lost it, not yelling or causing a scene, but in that cold, scary, calm way that's almost worse. I told him he had no right to speak for Mom anymore, not when he'd spent years letting another woman erase every trace of her from their home. The mom I knew would be heartbroken to see her house going to strangers instead of her only child. Dad tried to play the "but we're family" card, saying Lisa and her kids were my family too now. I shut that down fast. Lisa's kids were adults with their own dad when she married mine. They never lived in that house as children, never formed any real bonds with me, never treated me like family except when it benefited them. How the hell does it make sense that they'll inherit from 4 parents, their mom, their dad, my dad, and effectively my mom? When I could see I wasn't getting through to him, I went for my last resort. I told him I'd talk to a lawyer about our options. This wasn't entirely true. I'd only done some basic Google research, but Dad doesn't know that. I mentioned that since the house originally came from Mom's family, and since there might be questions about how assets were divided after her death, there could be grounds for a legal challenge. I didn't want to threaten him, but I needed him to understand I was serious. This wasn't something I'd just get over or accept. This was something I was prepared to fight for, even if it meant taking legal action against my own father. Dad's face went through this whole journey: shock, hurt, anger, and finally settling on this cold disappointment that parents specialize in. He told me he couldn't believe I'd consider suing my own father over property. He said if money and things were more important to me than family, then maybe he'd misjudged my character. That stung, not gonna lie, but I pushed back, asking if a house was more important to him than his relationship with his only child. I reminded him that I wasn't asking for money, in fact. I'd explicitly said he could leave all his other assets to Lisa and her kids if he wanted. All I wanted was for my mom's house to stay in her family where it belonged. We went back and forth like this for almost 2 hours, talking in circles, neither of us willing to budge. Eventually, Dad pushed his cup away and said he needed to think about everything. He tried to end on a hopeful note, saying we'd figure something out that worked for everyone. But the look in his eyes told me he had no intention of changing his plans. As we were paying the bill, he asked if I'd come over for dinner that weekend, said Lisa was making my favorite. She has no idea what my favorite food is. I told him I needed some space to process everything. The sad part was, he seemed more upset about me declining dinner than about the actual issue we'd been discussing. When I got home, I had 3 missed calls from Lisa. Of course, Dad had immediately called her after our meeting. I didn't call back. What was there to say? She texted later that night, this long paragraph about how she just wants everyone to be happy and how she thinks of me as her own son and how hurt Dad is by this whole situation. Classic manipulation tactics. The next day, I called my mom's parents to update them. My grandma cried on the phone. She told me stories about how they'd saved for years to buy that house, how proud they were to give it to Mom when she was starting her family, how they always pictured it staying in the family for generations. Hearing her so upset made me even more determined to fight this. Over the next few days, Dad tried calling a few more times. I answered once, but when it was clear he just wanted to convince me to drop the whole thing, I cut the call short. What really sealed the deal was when my roommate's girlfriend, who works at a law firm, helped me look up property records online. Turns out, Dad had already added Lisa to the deed of the house 3 years ago, while I was still living there. He'd never mentioned it, never discussed it with me, just quietly signed over half of Mom's house to his new wife. Finding that out felt like a knife to the gut. That's when I made my decision, no more keeping the peace for Dad's sake. I was going to fight for Mom's house, not just for me, but for her memory, for everything that house represented. If Dad wanted a legal battle, that's exactly what he was going to get. I met with a lawyer and gathered everything: old photos, family records, even sympathy cards mentioning the house. Mom's family backed me all the way. Dad found out about the legal consultation, somehow probably through a family friend, and completely lost it. Called me screaming, saying I was betraying him, that he couldn't believe his own son would sue him, that Mom would be ashamed of me. I stayed calm and told him he'd left me no choice. He'd betrayed Mom's memory and ignored what I knew she would have wanted. If he wasn't willing to do the right thing, then I had to fight for it. I heard from my cousin that Dad and Lisa were telling everyone I was money hungry, that I was jealous of her kids, that I had emotional problems stemming from Mom's death that made me irrational about the house. They were trying to control the narrative, painting me as the bad guy. Some relatives believed them, others saw through it. By this point, it wasn't even just about the house anymore. It was about standing up for what's right, about honoring Mom's memory, about not letting Lisa and her kids swoop in and take what wasn't theirs. It was about Dad choosing his new wife over his own son and his dead wife's wishes. The lawyer said it'd be tough. No will meant everything went to Dad, but since the house came from Mom's family, we might have a shot. The legal battle was brutal and quick, like ripping off a Band-Aid, except the Band-Aid was my relationship with my dad, and it took all the skin with it when it came off. My case basically fell apart in court. The judge ruled that since Mom didn't have a will, everything legally went to Dad when she died. The fact that the house came from my mom's family didn't matter in the eyes of the law. Dad had already added Lisa to the deed years ago without telling anyone, so she already co-owned it anyway. My lawyer tried arguing about the intention of my grandparents when they gave my mom the house, but without written documentation, it was just hearsay. In the end, we lost. There's no other way to put it. The court said Dad could leave the house to whoever he wanted. I was devastated, but not surprised. The legal system isn't designed to protect what's morally right. It protects what's technically legal. Losing the case sucked, but seeing Dad sit next to Lisa, not even looking at me, was worse. When the judge ruled in their favor, Lisa smirked. Dad just walked out, and that was the last time I saw my dad alive. I went completely no contact after the court ruling blocked his number, blocked Lisa and her kids, even blocked some family members who sided with them, deleted social media for a while because I couldn't stand seeing posts about their happy family or reading comments about what a terrible son I was for suing my own father. Mom's parents were heartbroken about the house, but supported my decision to cut contact. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, my grandpa said, and he was right. Some betrayals go too deep. For about a year, I focused on rebuilding my life, finished my degree, got a better job, moved to a nicer apartment, started dating this girl who's actually pretty amazing. Life was moving forward. The wound wasn't healed, but it had scabbed over. Then I got the call. Dad had a massive heart attack while at work, dead before the ambulance even arrived. He was only 54. Despite everything, it hit me like a freight train. I sat on my kitchen floor and sobbed for hours. All the anger and resentment got temporarily buried under a tidal wave of grief. He was still my dad. We had 16 good years before Mom died, before everything went to shit. Those memories still meant something. The funeral was awkward as hell. Lisa played the devastated widow perfectly, dabbing at dry eyes with tissues. Her kids stood around looking solemn, but I caught Tom checking his phone during the eulogy. I stayed in the back, didn't speak, didn't join the receiving line. Some of Dad's friends came over to offer condolences, but most people gave me a wide berth, like my estrangement was contagious. Lisa didn't speak to me at all, which was fine by me. I wasn't there for her. I was there to say goodbye to my dad. About 3 months after the funeral, I drove by the house and saw a for sale sign in the yard. Lisa hadn't even waited a decent interval before cashing out Mom's home, my childhood home, just another asset to liquidate. I didn't try to fight it this time. What was the point? Dad was gone, the legal battle was lost, and I was finally starting to heal. Better to let it go, right? After a couple of months where I tried to focus on myself, I heard through the grapevine that the house sat on the market for months. Lisa listed it way too high, convinced she'd cash out big, but the market dipped. And by the time she lowered the price, she walked away with way less than she expected. Turns out karma isn't just a concept, it's a financial reality check. Tom blew through his share in record time, first on a crypto scam, then on a business venture dealing weed more openly. 2 arrests later, he's couch surfing and on probation. Emma got herself a luxury car she couldn't afford, totaled it while texting, then tried to sue the other driver who just happened to be the son of the town's top lawyer. She lost everything. As for Lisa, she took her cut, ran off to Florida with some online boyfriend, and got smacked with a massive IRS bill for tax fraud. Turns out my aunt, who works in county records, helped uncover that little lie. Now Lisa's back in town, working a minimum wage job, whining about how unfair life is. Even her kids cut her off once the money dried up. Oh. And the new owners of the house tore it down and built something completely different. In a weird way, that's almost better. I don't have to drive by and see strangers living in Mom's house. It's just gone, like that chapter of my life. My grandparents' mom's parents are still hanging in there. When I told my grandma about Lisa's spectacular fall from grace, she just nodded and said, "Your mother always believed what goes around comes around." I think Mom would be satisfied with how things played out. I'm actually doing pretty well now. Got engaged to my girlfriend last month. We're saving for our own house, nothing fancy. Just something that's ours. Something I'll make damn sure stays in our family with a proper will and everything. I still miss Mom. I still have complicated feelings about Dad. Sometimes I dream about the house not as it was when Lisa had taken over, but as it was when Mom was alive. Sunday pancakes, movie nights, Mom's garden in full bloom. The house is gone. That can't be changed. But in the end, Lisa and her kids got exactly what they deserved for how they treated Mom's memory. They took something precious and meaningful and treated it like an ATM. Now they have nothing, no house, no money, no relationship with each other. Turns out Mom was right about one more thing. She always told me that material things don't last, but karma never forgets. Sometimes you don't need revenge. You just need to wait for the universe to balance its books.